welcome to the Menopause and Motherhood podcast with me, your host, SJ. Hey friends, how are you? How are you doing? How is November looking for you? I don't know about you, but I am starting to think about Christmas. I actually put the deposit down on the turkey for Christmas, and that got me thinking about food. Food and politics right now in the UK are very much linked. And that is why I thought today I was going to talk about food, the importance of where your food comes from, particularly for us as menopausal women, and the impacts that our food we know has on our body and on our hormones, but also the importance of the quality of the food and how that can impact our families' health. And it's really, really important to note, actually, food and politics really are linked. And I think for those of us living in the UK right now, with the stresses and the strains and the additional taxes and things that are being sort of put onto the farming community, I really feel now is the time to talk about this, to talk about where your food comes from, the importance of where your food comes from in terms of how it impacts you physically, mentally, hormonally as menopausal women, and also the impact that it can have on you as a family as well. So we're going to dig into some of that today. But for those of you that aren't in the UK, the sort of topic that I'm talking about at the moment that has really prompted this conversation today is the government that was elected in July in the UK have recently done what we call in the UK a budget. And what that means is they then tell you all of the different ways that they're going to sort of balance the books. Every country does it, of course. And one of the ways that our government here have decided to balance the books is to impose a particular type of tax on farmers and the inheritance of farms from one generation to the next here in the UK. And the reason that's quite a political, emotional kind of issue, of course, our background here is farming, but it's also a really, really kind of key issue when we think about where our food comes from. I've mentioned in the past, there's a really, really good book called Ultra Processed People, which I will link in the show notes. If you haven't ever read that book or listened to it on Amazon, I highly recommend it. It's written by a doctor here in the UK, and ultimately he kind of unpacks what ultra processed food is, how it is kind of created, the big companies that are behind all of this. If you search on YouTube ultra processed food, you'll find out lots of information. But really what today's conversation is about is, for us as a community, we want to be finding the best quality food for us. And that is going to be really, really crucial for us, particularly as women who are going through hormonal changes, because the ingredients in our food and the quality of our food is really going to have an impact on our hormones. We know that what we eat really does determine the way that we feel on a day-to-day basis, longevity when it comes to our future health, and also the health of our family around us. Now, I know this isn't just a British issue. I know that for those of you over in the US, there has been a lot of change going on for you guys politically as well. And I am aware over in the US that people might say that some of the food quality in the US is a lot lower because there's a lot of ingredients in foods in the US that are banned here in the UK and in the rest of Europe. I know just a really simple look at the ingredients in something like McDonald's French fries here in the UK versus the ingredients in McDonald's French fries in the US. The ingredients list is massively different. And this is why we need to be looking at food labels. I'm going to be giving you some ideas of how you can help yourself and support yourself in this process. But ultimately, what I'm talking about is making sure that you are getting the best quality food that you can afford, because I know that food can be expensive. and making sure that you and your family are eating the highest quality of food that you can, because the ingredients in that food really does have an impact on the way that you feel in yourself on a day-to-day basis, and also how you are going to feel in the future. And over the last few weeks in my master's that I've been doing, my master's in nutrition, we've been really digging into proteins and carbohydrates. I've been really studying like type 2 diabetes, the links between obesity, being overweight and type 2 diabetes, how the foods that we're eating, particularly the carbohydrates that we're eating, it can make us insulin resistant. And all of these things really are linked back to the quality of food that we are eating. And this is a political issue. It's a global political issue. But what I'm going to do is I am going to talk from the British perspective, because obviously that's what I know. We live in England. We are British farmers. We're an English farming family. But I think the things that I'm going to be saying are really transferable to where you are across the world, because the focus is very much about thinking about where your food comes from so that you know the kind of quality that the food has, and that's going to have an impact on your health. Now, I know a lot of people have on social media commented that, farmers, it doesn't matter about farmers, that farming isn't important. And my answer to that, it really does need you to take a step back and to think about what you're eating and where it's coming from. Now, if you think about yourself on a day-to-day basis as you're going down the aisles in the supermarket or the grocery store, if you think about the food that you see and think about like the produce section, for example, you have access to like a huge range of different fruits and vegetables and things like that come from across the world. Now, it's our world, our food system, it's massively globalized. And it's really, really easy to load your trolley up with lots and lots of foods that have come from, huge places across the world that have been manufactured in enormous factories that we really can't trace, like some of the ingredients, some of the meat that's going into these products. So I think this is why I want to talk about, first of all, is why buying local food matters. And for us in the UK, I'm going to talk about why buying local British food matters. But wherever you are in the world, I think this still applies to you, okay? So it's really easy to overlook the importance of buying local food to where you live. So for us in England, it's very easy for us to go into Sainsbury's or Tesco's or wherever it is that you do your food shopping and to just put things in your trolley without even reading the food labels or having a clue as to where your food has come from. But I will argue that choosing homegrown produce from the place in which you live and products can have a huge impact on our environment, our economy, and also our health. Now, you might be listening to me and thinking, do you know what? I'm not worried about the economy, like that doesn't matter to me. But you are listening to a podcast that is about health. So I know that health is important to you. And I'm sure that you do, as a parent, as a mother, care about the environment, because ultimately we want to leave the world in a good place for the next generation. So what I'm going to talk about now is going to have like 3 benefits in terms of supporting the environment, supporting the economy and the people around you that work in agriculture, and also for your health. So I am going to talk about British food, but you could substitute British for American, Australian, wherever it is you are in the world. So let's start off with the benefits of buying food that is grown and purchased in your local area. So first of all, by buying locally, by buying local British food, you're supporting local farmers and producers. So this is about the economy. So when you buy British food or food that is from the country that you live in, you are directly supporting farmers and producers who live in your community. Your purchase is benefiting people that live in your country. So that means your money is being spent and being earned by people who are living in the same country as you. Now, I don't know about you, but I have a real sense of patriotism for my country, and I want to support businesses that are in this country. I want to spend my money on like local businesses who I know that my money is going to be then supporting them so that they can then support their children. So this, you buying food, supporting local farmers and producers, helps to sustain, in this case with farmers, rural communities. And there's a guy on TikTok who I follow, and he's called like the Grumpy Farmer or something. And he was talking about the amount of jobs that come off the back end of a cow. And he was listing like all of these different jobs. And some of them were really obvious, like, you know, the farmer and, you know, the people that, like the butchers and the people that sell the meat. But there are so many other jobs in addition to that. And he was talking about like the accountants who are linked to, you know, like the farms. And he was talking about the people that make the tractors that use and the trailers that are used to transport the animals. He was talking about the people that have jobs in fencing, to put fences up to make sure that the animals stay where they're supposed to be. The people that are producing, you know, like the vets and the accountants for the vets that help to look after the animals. There are so many jobs that are linked to agriculture. And if you think about like the agricultural industry in your country, like think about how many people rely on that in terms of their jobs. And it's so much more than like the individual farmer. So by buying produce and products that come from the country that you live in, you're helping to create jobs for the people in the same country as you, and also preserve like traditional farming methods and practices that have shaped our countryside for generations. So those of you in the UK, I'm going to talk about like the UK countryside. Now, if you have ever been to the UK or you've walked in the countryside, we have a lot of like fields and hedgerows, and we have footpaths and bridleways, so people have the right to walk across certain places because they're public footpaths and public bridleways. Now, it's the farmers, it's us who maintain those bridleways and those footpaths. It's our job. We are responsible to make sure that people can walk on those footpaths, to make sure that the gates work and that, you know, people can access the countryside. But if farmers don't exist, that's not going to happen. And the hedges and the, you know, the amount of like sort of I'm just trying to think of examples like the hedgerows where all the animals live. We have recently been creating beetle banks in some of the fields. So we've been creating like an environmentally supportive practice that helps the beetles and gives them somewhere to live, because we know that the beetles will help and support the soil. So there's so many different, particularly, and I'm talking about British agriculture because I know more about it, obviously. But there are so many traditional farming methods that shape the way the countryside looks. And I mean, in the summertime here, we have lots of people who like to go and stand in fields with all, you know, like the borage, the purple borage flowers that we have, and take all their selfies and that kind of thing. And that wouldn't exist. Like, if farmers weren't here, that kind of thing would not exist. So every time that you're buying something that is produced locally, you're helping to support those traditional farming methods that really have shaped the countryside for like generations and generations. Another example in the UK is like dry stone walls. If you go into some parts of the UK, and the way that they divide their fields is not with like hedges, but with dry stone walls, which looks really beautiful and really attractive. Okay, so moving on from that, another benefit is the environment. So there's a huge amount of environmental benefits from buying food locally. Now, transporting food from abroad really does create a huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions. So if you think about like the way that your food comes to you, it either comes on a huge like container, like a ship container that takes a long time, so that uses like a lot of diesel to get there, or it comes via air, which is, you know, going to put out an awful lot of carbon emissions as well. But if you buy food that is locally grown, this is going to reduce the carbon footprint of your meals. So it's going to make it a more environmentally friendly option and more sustainable. And also, like buying local produce often requires like fewer preservatives, which is important for us when it comes to our hormones. We don't want food with huge levels of preservatives in it, and it's going to have less packaging. And less packaging, particularly plastic packaging, is going to be important for us from a health perspective as well as an environmental perspective, because plastic packaging, those plastics can disrupt our endocrine system. Those plastics can leach into the food, and that can be really, really harmful for our body and can disrupt the endocrine systems in our body. So this has so many benefits. Okay, let's talk about like the actual quality of the food as well. And this links back to like the way that it's transported, how long it's taking to get there. So British food, your local food, often travels a shorter distance from farm to fork. So we're talking about like from the farm to your table. So that means, because it hasn't had to travel so far, it means it's fresher and it's richer in nutrients. Now, what a lot of these big companies do, and bananas are a good example of this, is they will cut like the bananas before they're ripe, and they will keep them in freezers for really, really long periods of time. They'll keep them cold until they are ready to then like sort of ripen and then be sold to people. So by actually having like products that have been grown locally, that have maybe only traveled a few miles to like get on your table, that means that they're going to be fresher, they're going to have a lot more nutrients in them. And particularly if you're thinking about like wanting to have fresher and tastier produce, it's really important to have seasonal produce. So this is when you're harvesting food at its peak, and that's when it's going to offer like the best flavor compared to imported alternatives that are often picked, as I said earlier, picked before they're ripe to withstand the transport. Tomatoes are another really good example of this. Like if I go into a supermarket and I pick up like a packet of tomatoes, first of all, those tomatoes are all going to be wrapped in plastic, which isn't good for our health anyway. But they're wrapped in plastic to protect them because they're traveling. And then when you open the plastic and you actually cut into the tomato, it really doesn't have like a level, that kind of like nice level of flavor compared to a tomato that you might grow in your garden. Like when you're harvesting like the food that you've grown in your garden, it always tastes like so much better. And if I go to the farm shop near where we live, if I buy a tomato in the farm shop, it has so much taste. It's on a different level. And that is because these foods, when they're coming from a long distance, they're picked before they're ripe to withstand the transport. So the flavor and the texture really isn't comparable to having something that is harvested at its peak. And that's why having seasonal produce really, really is quite important. Okay, my next point on this is linked to food security. So this is something that we are talking about a lot in the UK, is being self-sufficient and not relying on imports from other countries. Now, if we rewind and we went back to the end of World War II, when everyone was still experiencing rationing and, we were really, during the war in this country, we were really pushing hard to get people to grow their own produce. And there was a lot of like dig for victory kind of campaigns and that sort of thing. If you live in England, you know what I'm talking about, because you probably come across it in a history lesson. But it's really important in this modern day and age to be self-sufficient. Now, for those of you that probably remember, like, when COVID was coming on, everyone kind of had this like really bizarre like panic buying over toilet roll. And I know for some of you that perhaps live in the States, you know that when like a hurricane is imminent, that people go and panic buy like water and, canned foods and things like that. And this is one of the things that's really important about making sure that we're supporting local farmers, locally, like people who are producing, like locally producing food, is because it's going to mean that you as a country are less reliant on imported food. So that makes your country like more secure. And if we as a country here in the UK are importing a lot of food, then it makes us really vulnerable to this like global supply chain food disruptions. And that can happen for huge different reasons. So we've seen this for so many different things, with things going up in price, and COVID and the war in Ukraine are really, really good examples of this. So by prioritizing, by buying locally produced food, locally produced seasonal food, you're going to be able to strengthen the national food security and reduce the dependence on international markets. And yes, I know that that is potentially going to mean that you have to adjust your diet. And it's going to mean that you might not be eating things that you normally eat. Now, a good example of this for me here in England is avocados. Like, we do not produce avocados in the UK. We're not able to grow them here. All of the avocados are imported. So because I want to support British food producers, we don't buy avocado anymore. Chickpeas are another example of that. We cannot grow chickpeas in the UK. It's very difficult to grow chickpeas. Soya is another example as well. So we don't buy those things because we want to support the local food producers and do our bit to support and make sure that this country is strong when it comes to food security, but also because we do care about the environment as well. And my last point on this, before I move on to talk about some of the things that you can do, like practically, to support the people wherever it is that you live who are producing food, is I really think it's quite a nice thing to support your heritage, like the heritage that you have in the country that you live. So for me, it's about celebrating British heritage. Like here in the UK, we have this huge history that we can look back on from kings and queens, and we have this really unique wealth of high quality foods that really do have like rich histories. And it's really things that sometimes we often take for granted, like Cornish clotted cream, for example. Those of you that have come across scones or scones, however you want to say it, there's the debate between Devon and Cornwall as to whether you put the jam or the cream on the scone first. But that's like part of our history and our heritage, our culture. Another good example of that is Scottish salmon, Yorkshire rhubarb. I grew up in Kent in the UK, which is in the south of the UK. And we were really, really well known for, in the past, having hops and making beer. And it's such a nice way to remember the heritage of a country through its food. If you think about like so many different countries, and I'm sure you can think about what it is that is relevant to you in your country and the type of food that is traditional to where you live. It really is a celebration of your country. Like food is such a celebration of your culture and your history. And I think supporting these local producers really does help to preserve these like cultural treasures that we have in the food that we're eating for our future generations. So let's move on to some really practical things that you can do wherever you are in the world to support food that is being produced locally, to support the people that are producing the food local to you. And, again, for those three main reasons, because it's going to be supporting the environment and the economy, and of course your health, because what is in that food is crucial. And when we are importing food from abroad, it's very difficult to trace and know exactly what is in that food. And for those of us that live in England, there are some really high standards around British food, the way that it is produced, the way that it is packaged, and what is on the label. There are some really very, very strict laws around ingredients and food labeling. And that's why I really think for us as a community who are interested in our health, interested in weight loss, it's so important to have that information and be able to trace where our food has come from so that we know what we are eating, so that we know whether or not this is going to be something that is good for our hormones, but is also going to be helpful in us losing weight. Now, I'm going to dig into some really practical ways that you can make a difference, things that you could go and do to support the local farmers to get your food locally. Now, this one is specifically linked to British food, and I am going to go into this in more detail at the end of the episode. But I'm sure for those of you that are living abroad, I'm sure your own departments of food have some form of regulation, and I would suggest you go and sort of look it up and find out a bit more. But one of the things that is quite helpful for us here in England when we are looking for food that is going to be of high quality and that is produced in the UK is to look out for a label which is called the Red Tractor logo, or specific indications of British origin. So these labels mean that you can ensure that your food meets UK standards. And those UK standards are very high when it comes to the quality, the safety, and also, if it's an animal product, the animal welfare. So if you are shopping in supermarkets, look for products that are clearly labelled with the country of origin, and many of the supermarkets here will actually put a British flag on it, so it's quite easy for you to see. But read where these things are coming from. Now, yogurt, I'm going to talk about yogurt because that's quite a good example. So when you are, say you're in a supermarket and you're buying a tub of yogurt, what you want to be looking for is where has that milk come from? Because in the UK, when we're buying yogurt, you can see clearly where that milk is sourced from. And what we often find here is that you will find products that have got British milk in them, and some products will have EU milk. Now, EU could be anywhere in the European Union. You are not able to trace where that milk has come from. So when you're reading your labels, and milk is a really good example of this, you want to know that that milk has come from a British farmer. And the reason you want to know that is because you know that that milk is going to be of a really high quality, it's going to be safe, and it is also going to have a high level of animal welfare as well. And if that's something you care about, that's going to be important to you too. So I really recommend digging into your food labels, really looking at where those ingredients come from. I'm sure for those of you that live outside of the UK, you're going to be able to find out where the food comes from. But it really does help by looking at the labels. It makes it easy to support farmers in your areas by reading the labels and buying produce that is grown and produced in Britain or wherever it is that you live. Now, another really easy way of doing this is actually bypassing the supermarkets and actually shopping at farmers markets. And I know that, yes, this can be more expensive. And I'm going to kind of share a little bit of knowledge with you in a second when it comes to this sort of thing and, you know, the cost of food and that side of things, because I know it's expensive. So if you have a local farmers market, they offer a really good opportunity to buy directly from local producers. So you're going to if you go to a farmer's market, you're going to find fresh seasonal products that are, you know, have been produced very locally, but you're also going to be putting your money straight back into farmers' pockets, which bypasses the middleman. Now, let me give you an example why this is important for us in the UK. So British farmers in the UK who produce milk get a very, very low amount of money per litre of milk. And that money that comes from the supermarkets is barely covers costs of milk production for dairy farmers here in the UK. But the supermarkets will buy that at an incredibly low cost, but that low cost does not get passed on to the consumer. It is a cost that the supermarkets make like millions and billions of pounds of profit. You just have to go onto like a website like Tesco or Sainsbury's and see how much profit these companies are making, because they are making the production costs, they are paying the producers, the farmers, such a low amount of money, but not putting that like price, like those low costs onto and passing that onto the consumers. So the middleman, the supermarkets, the people that are manufacturing these things are making a huge amount of money. So if you can go directly to a local producer, you're going to find potentially that you're going to be able to potentially like have a bit of a haggle over price. And also you could buy in bulk, which means that if you have like the capacity to store it, that you could actually then save yourself money over time because you're going to be buying more at a lower cost. A really good example of this is there's a farm that I follow on TikTok, and they do meat boxes, and you can buy from their shop on TikTok directly from them as the provider, the producer, and you can buy like meat boxes of different types and different sizes, with, you know, like with lots of different products in it, and you buy it from them and it's sent to your house the next day. And you know that what you're getting is a really, really high quality product, and everything that you're paying for that is going directly to the producer. And they use the same kind of like packaging as like those companies like HelloFresh use. And it really is a really good way of making sure that that money is going back straight to the producer, which gives them more power. And it cuts out those people in the middle who are the ones who are making all the money. And a really simple way, like that you might be able to do this. I've seen like people across the US who have like farm stands, people who have like those, when I talk about farm stands, so they might be like selling eggs and bread and things like that. Like that's something really easy that you could do, is if you're driving past somebody who is, you know, selling eggs, you could just buy the eggs from those people rather than buying them like from a supermarket. Okay, another practical thing that you can do to support yourself on your health journey by buying locally produced food is to eat seasonally. Now, seasonal produce not only supports the local farmers, but it also reduces the environmental impact of importing out of season goods. So, of course, you are not going to be then potentially having strawberries in winter here in the UK, because we don't grow them here during winter because we can't, it's too cold. But what you're going to do by eating seasonally, and this is where people who say to me, oh yeah, but it's so expensive to buy like local produce and da-da-da. Actually, it's not. If you're buying seasonal produce, it's going to be cheaper for you. Because if you think about like the cost of a punnet of strawberries, for example, in the UK right now, that's going to be a really, really high cost. And those strawberries are a lot cheaper in summer because it's a seasonal product. So find out what is seasonal to where you live. Do some Googling, like find some recipes. This is a really great opportunity to try different things as well and see what you like, what you don't like. Get a bit like imaginative with your diet, but it's going to save you money. And, like at this time of year, for example, for us in the UK, like root vegetables are really key. And this is a really, really good way of supporting local producers and saving yourself a ton of money. And also you're going to be massively helping the environment as well. Okay, another really good idea that is going to help you to support like local producers is to engage with your community and find out what sort of things are going on, because I can guarantee there will be some forms of like farming initiatives and open days and things like that you could attend. So here in the UK, a lot of British farmers host open farm Sundays, which is usually around the end of August, and they also have a huge host of other events. In the UK, we have many young farmers groups in different areas. For example, where we live, the young farmers community is going to put on a tractor rally for Christmas. So they'll be driving through the community in their tractors, and they'll be all lit up, and there'll be lots of Christmas celebrations. And so there's loads and loads of ways that you can get involved in your community to learn more about farming, to learn more about their work. There's probably maybe community gardens. Chloe had the opportunity in one of the towns not too far from here to go and participate in an allotment program that she really, really enjoyed. A lot of cities have allotments, so maybe you might want to go and see what's happening in the local allotments. Is there some kind of community gardening allotment program that you could get involved in? There's also quite a few educational initiatives that go on. So again, talking about the British system in the UK, part of the national curriculum for our children in the early years of primary school, in what we call Key Stage 1, which is from age 4 up to about age 7, they are required in school to learn about where their food comes from. And that might mean that there is an opportunity for them to go and visit a farm. And there are so many farms. I'm sure wherever you live in the world, there are so many opportunities for you to go and visit farms and to engage in what they're doing. And you passing that knowledge onto your children and you going to those kind of activities and days out is really going to help you to support and connect with the local farming community as well. And on a final note, I think it is important to stay informed in what sort of policies are impacting food and food production in your country. So for us in the UK, it's important to kind of stay on top with the Department for Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. I think we call it DEFRA now. So you can go onto their websites and have a look at what they're talking about in terms of different policies when it comes to food, and really actually having your own voice. If there are campaigns and petitions, you can take part in that. You don't have to be a farmer. One of the things that's happening on Tuesday in the UK here, there is a big rally where thousands and thousands of farmers are going into London to show their displeasure, shall we say, at some of the policies that the British government have implemented recently. And people across the country are being encouraged to wear their wellies on Tuesday to show their support for farmers. And that's something really, really simple and something really easy. But if you keep yourself up to date on what's going on in terms of the way that your food is being produced, you can show your support in a lot of different ways. Again, in the UK, we have the Farmers Union, which is called the NFU. And I'm sure a lot of other countries have their own version of this. I'm sure you have something similar in the States, for example. But just staying up to date of what's going on and keeping informed really means that you can add your voice and support to help secure local farming, local food production in your area, because I'm sure if you're still here and you're still listening to me talk about this, that this is something that is really, really important to you. So for those of you listening in the UK, I really hope that you are going to wear your wellies with pride on Tuesday to support the British farmers here in the UK. And I'm going to spend a few minutes now digging into the Red Tractor Award, that the Red Tractor logo, which is a food standard that we have here in the UK. So this might not be something that you want to listen to if you are in the US or outside of England, but you are more than welcome to stick around and hear me talk about this, and maybe you might want to go away and to see if there is something similar that is in place where you live. Okay, let's talk about the British Red Tractor system, which is a red tractor logo, which in the UK is a trusted symbol of quality, safety, and sustainability in food and in farming. And if you've ever seen this logo on food packaging, you might be wondering what it represents and why it's important. So I'm going to break this down for you. And then as you're going through the supermarkets, this is something that you can be looking out for to know that your food is going to be of high quality, and also that you are supporting British farmers as well. So let's talk about the Red Tractor. What does the Red Tractor logo, what does it mean? So the logo assures consumers that the product that they are buying meets a high standard at every stage of production. So that means from the farm to the packaging process. Every step in that process is checked to ensure the food is safe, responsibly sourced, and is grown with care. Now, the Red Tractor scheme is something that I am aware of. I'm not actually personally involved in the process, but this is definitely something that Tim, who is the farmer in our household, is very, very aware of. I did try and persuade him to come on the podcast and talk about it, but he didn't really want to. So let's talk about some of the key standards that are within the Red Tractor scheme. So first of all is food safety. This shows that the food is produced under hygienic conditions and is traceable back to the farm. And this is one of the things I think is so important, is we need to be able to trace where our food comes from. And this takes me back to where I was talking earlier about the yogurt. The difference between knowing that and being able to see that a yogurt has come from and is made from British milk is totally different to buying a yogurt that is produced from milk in the EU, because that could come from anywhere. Like, how many countries are in the EU? There is no way really of tracing that product. Okay, next up, animal welfare. The Red Tractor scheme guarantees that animals are well cared for with access to proper nutrition, shelter, and health monitoring. So if you care about animal welfare, in the UK, British farmers, we have high levels of animal welfare. British farmers really do care about their animals and want to make sure that they are well cared for. The Red Tractor scheme also means that the products are environmentally responsible, so it promotes sustainable farming practices to protect the land, the water, and the wildlife. So, for example, we often have the Environment Agency walking around our land here, checking the water levels, looking to see if any sort of like chemicals or anything have gone into the water supplies. The Red Tractor scheme is part of that process. And the final element as well of the Red Tractor scheme is there to actually to support the farmers themselves. So it's about the worker welfare. So this really means that we're upholding fair treatment and safe working conditions for people who are working in farming. So if you think about products that are made globally, we can't ensure that. But if you're buying things that are made in the UK, you know that those standards are going to be upheld. So why does it matter? Why do we think this is important? Aside from a lot of the things that we've already said, we've spoken about the economy, we've spoken about the environment, we've spoken about the health. The Red Tractor really does support British farmers and the British farmers who adhere to these rigorous standards. It's not easy to achieve this mark. There is a lot of paperwork, there is a lot of time that goes on behind the scenes, but it really does ensure that you're buying food that is locally produced, which reduces the environmental footprint compared to imported goods as well. So, how do you find it? How do you find Red Tractor products? You look on the label for the Red Tractor logo on fresh produce, so meat, dairy, and even packaged goods as well at your local supermarket. It really helps you to find products that are made and produced with really good quality in the UK. So if you are still here and you live in the UK, I really encourage you to go do your due diligence, read your labels, look for that Red Tractor logo, and particularly when you are buying meat and dairy products, because that's a really, really easy way of making sure that that product has come from the UK. It's a really higher quality product and it is traceable as well. Right, my friend, this has been quite a long episode, but I really hope that you found it helpful and informative, and I hope that you can go away and put some of those things and steps into practice. Let me know how you get on. If you have any questions, please reach out. My email is in the show notes. Have an amazing day, have an amazing week, and I look forward to catching you in the next episode.